Welcome to Programming Google Gemini. In this video, we'll take a look at how do I generate text using Gemini. I'm Dr. Chris Jameson, and in this channel, we look at ways to integrate AI into your applications. We'll look at both Gemini and OpenAI, see how they do things similarly, see how they do things differently. But let's go ahead and jump into some Gemini code. So you probably worked with Google AI Studio to interact with a large language model that can do text generation. In this case, I just simply prompted, what is text generation? And got a detailed response. When you generate text, you're not restricted to only generating text. You can do stories, you can do poems, you can do translations, you can do much, much more. In this case, I just simply ask, write a poem about artificial intelligence. So I wanted to get more specific, and I've got a new book, OpenAI and ChatGPT Programming. So I gave the prompt some information about me, about the book, where I live, the book's cost, what it presents. It uses Python code, and ask it to generate a press release for me. And so the generated capabilities are very strong. When you use generated AI, you're not restricted to text only. In this case, I've asked it, create a Python script that demonstrates the use of Matplotlib. You can use it to generate Python, other programming languages, and even SQL queries. So your question probably is, how do I program Google Gemini for text generation? Let's jump in and take a look. To start, you'll want to pip install Google-generated AI. That will give you the libraries that you need to write code that calls Google API, and more specifically, the Gemini model. So here's a simple Python script that shows the use of text generation from within your own applications. We start by importing Google.generated AI. To interact with the API, you need to have an API key. For simplicity, we're just going to hard code that key, which you can get from Google AI Studio, into our code. It's not ideal because you don't want Python scripts laying around to have your key in it so other people could start to use your key. But for a quick and dirty example, it will work. We then configure generated AI. I create a prompt. What was the origin of hello world in programming? I call the API. The API in turn will give me my response, which you can see on the right is a pretty detailed origin of hello world and why we use it. So I said you don't really want to hard code your API key into your scripts. And a better way is to create an operating system environment variable that contains your key. In this case, I've used the Windows set command to create an API key called Gemini._API_key. And I'm using the OS library. I'm calling the get environment method to get my key based on that environment variable. Everything else then is pretty much the same as the previous program. We configure our model using our API key. We come up with a prompt. What is the origin of the term bug in programming? We then specify what model we want to use, Gemini. I call the API, and as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, it gives me a detailed explanation of the term bug. Now, if you don't define your own API variable within the operating system environment, Google will automatically look for one called Google_API_key. So you can set it instead. Then you can eliminate a little bit of code, keep your code a little bit cleaner. In this case, I import Google.generated AI. I then configure it. By default, that's going to go out and look for that Google_API_key environment variable. I have my prompt. When was Python created and by whom? I tell which model I want to use. I want to use Gemini. And then I call the API. You can see on the right-hand side, I get my response about who created Python and when. Now, when you interact with text generation in the Google AI Studio, it's going to maintain a context or history of your conversation. So in this case, I ask, what is the capital of Arizona? It comes back with Phoenix. I then ask, what's the name of their football team? Now, I could be talking about a lot of football teams, but based on the context, it knows I'm talking about Arizona. It comes back and tells me the Arizona Cardinals. So how do we write code that takes advantage of this? So I've got a simple script that's going to use that chat history capability. I import Google.generated AI. I configure the model. It's going to grab my key from the Google_API_key environment variable. I then tell it I want to use the Gemini Pro model. And next, I'm going to start a chat history. And so I can send my messages over to it. It's going to get the response. I'm going to ignore the first one. What is the capital of Arizona? So I can ask my next question. Who is their football team? And it will then, from my response, which you can see, I've gotten the Arizona Cardinals. So what's next? Interacting with the application to send 1 or 2 lines over is great for text generation, but to really get a feel for where the text generation capabilities, we're going to create an application that displays a couple of text boxes. In the first text box, you can put your context. I've cut and pasted some text from my book. And then the second text box, you can ask a question. Summarize the text as a bulleted list. When I click submit, the Google API using the Gemini model will then analyze my text and give me my bulleted list. So make sure you subscribe to the model so you can get videos on the next capabilities. And I will see you in the chats.